Hello everyone, my name is Jaclyn Cowen and I am a volunteer of Consecutivos, which is a non-profit, educational and research organisation that is dedicated to the study of past lives. And so today's topic is culture and Seriexis. And I have an interest in this subject in relation to the study of different cultures and also looking at cultures in the past and different groups in the past and analysing the traits or characteristics of these groups and seeing what of those traits do we have within ourselves in order to recycle traits or to assume the strong traits that we have. So before I begin, I would like to mention the disbelief principle. So this is the idea that to not believe in anything that I will say during this class or this talk, and really to keep, to maintain your criticism, okay, question what I'm saying, and to have your own experiences, to experiment and see if what I'm saying has logic or does not have logic for you. So the objective of this class will be to understand what culture is, so understand the various elements, and to understand how culture influences the consciousness over many lives. So looking at culture, the culture that we're in today, various cultures around the world, but also looking to the past, the various cultures and civilizations from the past. And also to perform Syria Ecological research in relation to cultures from the past. So how to do this? What do we need to look at? So if we can go to the next slide, why do we need to learn about this? So the first thing is to expand your understanding about yourself as a multidimensional and multicultural consciousness. So the culture that we live in today is not the only culture that we've lived in. We've had many past lives in many different cultures, and to expand your awareness that of yourself having lived in many different cultures. And to gain greater awareness about where your traits came from in order to assume the strong traits and recycle the weak traits. So all groups, all cultures have elements which are positive and other elements which are not so positive. And over many lives, we have assumed traits, both strong traits, and we have also both weak traits from the group that we have taken within ourselves. And finally, to also better understand your target groups of assistance based on the groups that we interacted with in the past. So there's two areas or two specialties of conscientiology that are particularly relevant to the talk I will give today. The first is Seriexology, and Seriexology is the specialty of conscientiology applied to the study and research of Seriexis or existential seriality, being the set of interphysical lives of a consciousness based on the consensual paradigm. So it is the study of Seriexis, which is the series of continuous intraphysical existences that we have over a long period of time, and alternating with extraphysical experiences, those periods that we have between the intraphysical existences. And another specialty is parasociology. So parasociology is the specialty of conscientiology that studies and researches techniques and practices of conscientiological socin, or intraphysical society, and Seriexis, or extraphysical societies, and its respective consequences in the human, extraphysical, or projective life. So I'll be looking at the impact that these various lives in these various groups and cultures in the past, over many lives, has the influence that it's had on the consciousness in our present life. So let's begin with, what is culture? So culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. So it's the social behavior and norms found in human societies. So it includes the external or visible elements that we can see, such as the food that we eat, the way we dress, our behaviors, the language, and it's easier to identify these elements. But it also includes those more internal or invisible aspects, which is not so easy to perceive. And these includes the values of the person, the beliefs, the norms. Okay. So in terms of culture, I would like to define the one aspect of these beliefs, the beliefs that represent a culture, that are in the culture. So this is the aspects of the culture which are accepted as being true and not questioned. So generally these beliefs have been part of the culture for a very long time, and because of this people don't question them. It can be part of the paradigm of the culture, for example, the paradigm of materialism, so that only the physical dimension, physical phenomena exist. This can be an example of the belief that people have, or superstitions within a culture, or religion, religious aspects. And then there are the values of a culture. And this is what is regarded as, within a culture, as good or bad, right or wrong, fair or unfair, just or unjust, beautiful or ugly, clean or dirty, valuable or worthless, appropriate or inappropriate, and kind or cruel. So an example of a value within a culture can be individualism. So we see in many of the Western cultures, we have this characteristic where people believe very strongly in individual rights, okay? And there is this idea of you as a person coming first and your family, okay, before anyone else. But then in other cultures, for example, in China, they have very strongly this value of collectivism, which is where they put the group first. This has primary importance. So, and this is before the individual needs. The group's needs comes before the individual needs. So the needs of the family are more important, the community and the country, okay? And this influences how people think and interact with each other, okay? And then finally, we have the strong traits and weak traits of a culture. And this is when we're doing an evolutionary analysis of the various elements of the culture, including the beliefs, including the values, okay? And so a culture can have both strong and weak traits. So the strong traits in terms of culture, those are the traits that exist in the culture, which are evolutionary positive. So it actually helps the members within that group to evolve. But then we have also the weak traits of the culture, okay? Those traits, characteristics which influence consciousnesses that do not promote this evolution, that actually evolutionary stagnate consciousnesses. Each person, as they're influenced by the culture, they can take on board these various traits which either inhibit their evolution or favor their own evolution. Okay. So in this life, we are born in a particular family, culture, and religion. So we come to identify ourselves as being of a particular culture. However, in previous lives, we experienced lives in different family, in a different culture or country or religion. And so this notion helps us to expand our view as to who we are and our own identity. And it also helps us to expand our sense of conviviality with others and develop rapport with other people from a different culture, especially if we know that in past lives we experienced a life in that particular culture. Okay. So another thing that I would like to mention is this idea, this influence of culture on the consciousness. So there are various influences on the consciousness, and the reason why I want to look at this is to see what part culture plays in influencing the culture in this current life. So we have various influences. We have the temperament, we have paragenetics, genetics, and culture. So I'll be looking at each one of them. And in a single life, it's understood the culture in which you are born into has the least amount of influence. However, if we look at the role that culture plays over many, many lives in the past, and the influence it has on this life, then we can see that culture contributes a lot to us, to who we are. So, what is genetics? Genetics is the biological heritage of the consciousness. So it also includes, what you have, the influence that your parents has had on you, the genetic influence, and also it includes the more instinctive parts of the human, and so those more instinctive biological impulses that we have, and also the impact of our physiology and hormones on us as well. And then we have mesology or culture, and this is the external influences of the consciousness, including the family upbringing, the school, and the influences from society, okay, and the country in which you live in. And then we have paragenetics. So paragenetics is the consciousness's own genetics or personal inheritance, which they have developed over previous human lives and which is recorded in the psychosoma. So it includes things such as charisma, talents, tastes, character, biotype, which is our physical shape, birthmarks even. So it contributes a lot to us. And so we have the influence of genetics, we have the influence of mesology or culture, and we also have the influence of paragenetics, which is what we as in consciousness brings into our current life, okay? And finally, there is the aspect of temperament. So temperament is comes from the paragenetics and is the true character or nature of the consciousness without the influence of present cultural influences. So it's our natural way of acting and reacting to things. And it includes those aspects that we may not reveal to other people if it's not culturally appropriate. So maybe those things that we do in the privacy of our own home. And it includes things like our tastes, our inclinations, predispositions, preferences, particularities, emotional reactions, our humor, and our mother thoughting. And finally, we have, just to complement this temperament, that aspect of ourselves that we develop for each life is the personality. So we have the temperament, which is intrinsic within us, and that it is the same for each new life, okay? So our temperament remains the same with few changes, okay, over lives. However, what changes more is our personality. So our personality, we come to a new life and we have these influences from the culture, and the genetics, and we actually present a new ego, we can say. So the personality is the influence of the culture on our individual manifestation, and we might hide aspects of our temperament in order to be viewed as socially acceptable and this is presented in our personality. Okay. So our temperament has been influenced by our past experiences, thus all the previous cultural and religious experiences. So for instance, a person who lived many lives within the British culture, you can comes to this life, and even if they're in a different culture, they still may present aspects of the British culture. And so it's interesting. So even though you are born into a specific culture, you still get variances. The culture still influences you, but you may present elements from different cultures that you may have lived in past lives. So for example, a Brazilian person has traits of a British temperament and maybe is a little bit more reserved, okay? And so this can show that they may have had many past lives in this type of culture, which has influenced their paragenetics and their temperament. And so we can see that the Brazilian culture, you know, a person who is influenced in the Brazilian culture, they're more socially interactive, they express their emotions a little bit better, and a person who has a different type of temperament can present elements from a different culture, for example. Yes, so we have a question.
We have a question here from Rosiana. She's asking, what are the strong traits and weak traits of the Australian culture already identified in your researches?
Okay, that's a good question. So one aspect of the Australian culture that I have identified is this aspect of egalitarianism. So egalitarianism, and I think this was influenced by the history of Australia, in which it was based on convicts that came from England. They came as deported criminals, and And so there's a lot of them, and so there was this sense when they came here over some time that they had rights, and they should be treated equally, and this kind of egalitarianism, that this equality between people arose. And so it is quite a strong element, aspect of the Australian culture. And so this is one trait that I like and admire in the Australian culture. And so people are aware of it, and they try to treat others in a more equal way. The hierarchy isn't so strong. So this is one aspect. And then there is other traits which come from the British. I guess it's been inherited from Britain, okay? Because a lot of people, most of the immigrants from the beginning were coming from Britain or Ireland or Scotland. And so there's a lot of influence from those cultures in the Australian culture. And so you get a little bit of this reservedness that comes through. So the Australians are a little bit more reserved than, for example, the Brazilians, even though they're still friendly and open, but they have that aspect of British reservedness. And also that they like to drink a lot. So yeah, there's various elements. So yeah, I hope this answers your question. And so if we keep going, and even within a culture, we can see that some of our traits, our strongest weak traits, or our strongest mega strong trait, or our mega weak trait, the strong, I guess the most dominant strong trait that we have, or the most dominant weak trait that we have, this can actually be connected to groups that we were connected with in the past. So, for example, and this includes cultural groups, and I can talk about my own traits because I was born in a Jewish family, and I was strongly involved in the Jewish community, and I know that I had many past lives within the Jewish group. And of course, this is part of my ongoing research, okay? So we can't say anything is for certain, but based on my research, the probability is there that I did experience many lives in the Jewish group. And one of the things that I can notice about my temperament is that those traits within my temperament and personality, they come from the Jewish group. So, for example, a strong trait can be this, love of learning, okay, being interested in books and wanting to always learn new things. And this is a strong trait of the Jewish group. And the weak trait, one of the strongest weak traits I have is this idea of victimization. And this victimization, and again, we need to see whether this trait is a product of having lived in this life and being influenced by the Jewish group in this current life, or it's an influence of all the many lives that I had within this Jewish group. And I'm not just talking about the persecution that the Jewish group experienced, but also how they reacted, how this sense of being a victimized group, and how this influenced the members of this group over many lives, so that they have this trait more strongly within themselves. And so it can be with any group, okay? And you can look at yourself and you can research your traits and track them to groups, cultures in the past to see their root, to see how I guess the root of the trait and how it influences you in this current life. So first of all, we need to rule out the idea that the traits that we have are an influence maybe of our genetics or the current culture in this life, because we know that people are influenced to, how can I say, conditioned by their culture. So we need to first separate those things and then see what are those things which are different from our culture, or, for example, those things which are different from what we've been brought up, how we've been brought up in our family, for instance, and yeah, and see if we can trace those things to cultures from the past. And so it's kind of this idea of looking at yourself, okay, analyzing yourself, doing this self-research, and then looking at the cultural group that you feel that you had a connection with, that you had past lives in, and researching aspects of this group. And so making this movement back and forth and deepening this self-research, okay, and this understanding of yourself. And so when you understand more about yourself based on the cultures that you were part of, and analyzing the cultures more and uncovering more traits that were part of that culture that you have within yourself, and then you can, the whole point of this is to be able to recycle those aspects which, you know, no longer, how can I say, that no longer serve you, that are not evolutionary positive, not healthy, and to assume also those strong traits that we had. And we understand that there are traits within the traits that we may have picked up from previous cultures thousands and thousands of years ago. For example, we may have picked up a trait from ancient Greece, okay? And this trait was, they had value of, for example, open sexuality. They had a concept of sexuality where, you know, men could be with other men, and this was acceptable, and they admired this quality. And yet the consciousness can come to this current life and still having that, still valuing that trait, however, it no longer serves them in this current life. And so there's various traits within previous cultures that the consciousness, for some reason, they held on to these traits or characteristics, and they haven't recycled them. So, for example, there is, but on the other hand, there are those traits that the consciousness may have recycled. And so they look at the culture in the past, and they no longer have that trait, or there may be traces within themselves of that trait. And so it's still positive and beneficial to know about it. However, it's been supplanted by stronger traits. So, for instance, in Egypt, the culture was very mystical, and you know, this was relevant for the time. It was appropriate for the time. They didn't have the information, so for whatever reason, the culture was more like this. However, if the consciousness continues to have that trait in this life and has not recycled this trait, this can be a problem. Okay, if we see things in a mystical way and we don't apply discernment and we don't, you know, obtain the facts and always want to research and find out new things and new information, this can be a problem. And so, but if the person developed more of a scientific, objective, questioning mentality, so they recycled this trait from the past, then so then they no longer have this trait that they had, and so now they have more of a scientific trait that they may have picked up over their lives. If there's any questions, please ask me. So what we need to do is we need to identify because we had many experiences in many different cultures, many different groups. However, what we need to do is to identify which groups or which cultures predominate in you. Okay, so this is what we need to look at. Because all of us are different, even though we had many lives in different cultures, we may have experienced more lives in a particular culture or been, how can I say, influenced more by that culture than others who lived in those cultures. And so we come into this life, and so we need to be able to find out which cultures, the traits that I have within myself, which cultures, how can I say, are connected, right? And so we can trace within ourselves traits from the earliest human civilizations, okay, up to the present day. So just moving to a timeline, I would like to show you a timeline. Just to show you, and this is something that you can research at home. And so we have 3 slides because the one graph wasn't able to fit. It would have been too small, the information. Probably is quite small, but just to give you an idea of the various civilizations that existed. And so you can see the red line at the top. This is from Egypt. And so you can see this is one of the oldest civilizations, and it continued for a very long period of time. If you see from one slide to the next, the red line continues. And so it's interesting that to think if this is one of the, the longest continuous civilization until a certain period, right? And so the chance of us having had lives in this group and being strongly influenced by this group is quite strong, right? And then we have also the Chinese civilization, another civilization which has continued until the present day, right? So again, another a culture that we may have had quite a few lives within. And so there's many different civilizations and cultures that we had lives in. So just to give you an overview of that. Okay. So how can we, what's one way that we can identify the influence or having had past lives in a particular culture? So one thing that we can do is we can look at the affinities that we have with a particular culture. So if we have a strong affinity, this can indicate that we had a past life in this group. For example, when reading about the French Revolution and we feel like this strong connection, right, with the whole process, then maybe, and also if we have, for example, we feel very strongly about these concepts of liberty and equality, right? Then maybe we may have had a past life, and then we can start to do research, right? We can research about what was involved with the French Revolution and the context, right? Or, for example, the Renaissance period in Italy. So when we hear the Renaissance, it's something pretty cool. It's, you have that feeling, there's a good chance I was there, right? So it's just this feeling, right? This affinity, this rapport that you have with the group. And of course, this is not, you can't say that having an affinity is, you can't conclude that for sure I had a past life, but it initiates the research. So then you can go and research and deepen the research and try to have retrocognitions, and over time you can build up a body of facts and parafacts that can help you to conclude that there's a strong possibility that you had a past life in that culture, right, during that period. And then you have the repulsion, okay? This is the other side. So if you feel strong discomfort or you have a strong reaction to a particular culture, maybe you traveled to the culture, to a country, and there's something you didn't like, this can also indicate that you had a past life in this group, in this culture. However, maybe it was something, your life wasn't so positive, maybe you experienced a trauma, and so even though you don't remember the experience, it's still within you, okay? You still recorded that it comes through in the repulsion, in that discomfort. But don't disregard, okay, this repulsion that you have. Another thing is, not only can we look at ourselves to find the clues of having lived in previous past cultures, but also we can look within our own family. And it's very interesting, if we look within our family, there are clues, there are indications that we experience, that we lived in previous cultures in the past, in past lives. And that especially because of our connections with group karmic connections, most likely that we had previous lives within this group that we're closely connected to in previous cultures and previous civilizations. So, and it can be something that's a completely different culture from the one that you are inserted in now, okay? So, for example, you can look at a family, for example, in the United States, okay, they grew up in that culture, and yet there's indications that, for example, the father, he speaks French, the daughter, she is interested in French cuisine, she's traveled to France and done a cooking class there, and there, you know, there's indications, and they have affinity with France. Maybe this group was, you know, had past lives in France. So there's always indications. Look at your family and see if there is that connection with specific cultures. In my family, I see this connection with India, which is interesting. In some of the family members, in the way that they dress, the fact that they traveled to India a couple of times, even in the decor in the home, right? So all these things can show, right, this connection between the family and the past lives. I want to move to a slide here that I have of just some cultures, some ancient cultures, and I've put the main values and beliefs of these particular cultures, just to give you some sense of maybe you can recognize some traits within yourself from these cultures. So we have ancient Egypt. I'm not going to go through all of them, but maybe just one or two. So for example, in ancient Egypt, they were very strong with this gratitude, sense of gratitude for life. And they were very strong in the rituals and this idea of afterlife. On the other hand, if we look at ancient China, they have these traits of harmony, benevolence, courtesy, wisdom, and loyalty. So these traits are quite strong. And so, yeah, you can look to yourself, which traits are stronger within you, and sometimes you can link that to the past culture. And so, yeah, and another thing which you can look at is at your own tastes and preferences. So, for example, looking at the clothes that you like to dress in, okay? What clothes do you like to wear? Do you just follow the fashion, or do you have your particular style, right? And this could have a connection with a past culture that you strongly identified with. And then if you link that to the culture from the past. So sometimes people like to dress, they're influenced a bit by the Egyptian culture. So all these subtleties you can look at. What in makeup even, for example, wearing strong black eyeliner. So popular today, and yet sometimes it can, how can I say, be influenced by the Egyptian culture, right? Who used to use that black eyeline. And what type of food you like to eat, the music, right, that you like to listen to, and so on and so forth. Okay. And also I would like to mention just because we're running out of time here, I would just like to, that's why I'm moving a little quickly, but I would like to mention about the different areas that you can research in that will help you to deepen your research about past cultures and about yourself. So for example, looking in the mythologies of different ancient cultures. This can be a really good source of information about the values and the beliefs of a particular culture. As the mythologies influenced so much the culture, and it reflected the values of the people in that culture. Also, the religion, religion played a huge part in the past. So what religion was closely connected with the culture and the influence that it had on the person. Reading about history, so looking at history books and learning about the various cultural aspects, right? And even in literature or plays, for example, even in Victorian England, right? You can look at various literature, maybe by Charles Dickens, and he was very good at showing the various cultural elements, the elements of the society at that present time. And then there are movies and series. And finally, traveling to other countries. So it's very important, if you want to conduct past life research, it's important to travel, to visit other countries, because you'll have experiences that you can't have maybe to the extent that you can have if you're just reading books, for example, or researching. This all helps. But when you are in the culture, you're immersed in the culture, and you are in connection with maybe buildings or environments that you experienced or that you walked through in the past. This, and then the repercussions that this has on you. Maybe you have an energetic shower, or where you feel this tingling, or you have different parapsychic perceptions. So it can be very rich, or you can feel the strong affinity or discomfort. So traveling to other countries is very important. Also, it helps to open your mind, and you have that opportunity of interacting with people from different cultures and seeing the rapport that you have with people from other countries. And the more that you are open to other cultures, the more likely you are able to see those connections between yourself and those other cultures. So trying to avoid any preconceptions, right? So being closed to other cultures. So the best posture to have is to be open, right? Be as universalistic as possible, and this will help you to recognize that you have lived in these other cultures and the influence that these cultures have had on you. And just finally, I would like to end with, we've talked about various aspects that we can study in our life, but we can also have retrocognitions. And this can help us to deepen our research. We can have an experience where we see ourselves in that particular culture and the influence that that culture has had on us, on ourselves. And we can design what is called a retrocognitarium, which is a specially designed retrocognitive laboratory, where for example, if you have a connection to a past life, or how can I say, you feel a strong affinity with the Chinese culture, and you create an environment where there are many objects and images from the Chinese culture. You try and recreate that environment, and this can help predispose you to have a retrocognition that is connected to that culture. So this can help. So this is the end of my talk. I thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.